The fire began in silence. No shouts. No warnings. Just the sudden glow of orange on the horizon. Logan Reed had seen this too many times to ignore the signs. The wind carried the scent of accelerants, sharp chemical, undeniable. He crouched low on the hill, binoculars in hand, scanning for movement. There it was, a hooded figure retreating into the tree line. His jaw tightened. This wasn't a wildfire, it was a weapon. In the distance, flames licked at the sky. And Logan knew this was no accident. It was a message. And he was going to find out who sent it. Leave a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. If you enjoy stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey tomorrow. The roar of the fire was deafening. Its heat palpable even from the edge of the block. Flames tore through dry brush, leaping from house to house with terrifying speed. A group of firefighters scrambled to set up containment lines. Their movements urgent but methodical. Despite their best efforts, the blaze was relentless, fueled by strong winds and unusually dry conditions. "Move the truck closer," the captain shouted over the chaos. "We need more water on the east side before it jumps the road." Ethan, one of the younger firefighters, hauled a hose into position, sweat dripping beneath his helmet. Beside him, Jim, a seasoned firefighter in his late 50s, worked with a steady precision born of decades in the field. "Something's off about this one," Jim muttered as he adjusted the nozzle. Ethan shot him a questioning glance. "What do you mean?" Jim gestured toward the flames. "The way it's burning. This isn't just wind or bad luck. Look at the patterns, too fast. Too erratic." Across the street, Logan stood silently, watching the scene unfold. He was tall, with a lean, wiry frame that hinted at years of discipline. His face was hardened. Not from anger but from loss, a grief etched into his every movement. A former special operative in his late 40s. Logan had seen enough destruction in his lifetime to know when something wasn't natural. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the burn lines. The fire didn't behave like a typical wildfire. Certain areas were charred more intensely than others. And the way the flames spread seemed deliberate. Almost calculated. "Accelerants," he muttered under his breath. Logan wasn't here by accident. The fire had claimed his wife and daughter just days earlier, consuming their home while he'd been away on a work trip. Since then, he'd dedicated himself to understanding the disaster that had destroyed his life. What he saw now only deepened his suspicions. As the firefighters regrouped, Logan stepped closer, his presence drawing a few curious glances. He approached Jim, who was kneeling by a patch of scorched ground. "Mind if I take a look?" Logan asked, his voice calm but firm. Jim straightened, his brow furrowing. "You with the department?" "No," Logan admitted. "But I know what I'm looking at." He crouched beside Jim, pointing to the edges of the burn area. "See this? The fire didn't spread naturally here. That's the mark of an accelerant, probably a petroleum-based one." Ethan crossed his arms, skeptical. "And you know this how?" "Special operations." Logan replied without elaborating. "I've seen sabotage like this before." The captain approached, his expression impatient. "What's going on here?" "This guy thinks it's arson," Ethan said, the doubt clear in his voice. Logan stood, meeting the captain's gaze evenly. "I don't think I know. Look at the burn patterns. The fire moved too fast, and it spread against the wind in some areas. That's not natural." The captain frowned, glancing at Jim for confirmation. Jim hesitated. then nodded. He's got a point. It's not the first time I've seen something like this. Back in '93, we had a fire that turned out to be set for insurance fraud. This feels similar. The captain sighed. Clearly torn. Even if he's right, it's not our job to play detective. We're here to fight fires, not chase arsonists. Logan's jaw tightened. And what happens if they set another one while you're busy putting this out? The captain stared at him for a long moment before shaking his head. We don't have time for this. He turned to his crew. Get back to work. We need to contain this before it spreads any further. Logan stepped back, his frustration barely concealed. As the firefighters moved to their positions, Jim lingered, studying Logan carefully. You seem pretty sure about this, Jim said quietly. I am, Logan replied. Jim nodded slowly. I can't promise anything, but I'll keep an eye out. If you're right, we'll need proof. That's all I'm asking, Logan said. Jim held out a hand. Jim Daniels. Been with the department 30 years. Logan Reed, he replied, shaking Jim's hand. As Logan watched the firefighters battle the flames, he felt the familiar stirrings of purpose. He didn't know what he could do yet, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let the truth burn away in the ashes. The fire raged with relentless fury, consuming everything in its path. Smoke billowed through the air, stinging eyes and choking lungs. Logan stood at the edge of the chaos, watching as the firefighters prepared to enter another hot zone. He had spent years in high-stakes operations, but this was a different kind of battlefield, one where the enemy couldn't be reasoned with or taken down by force. Reed, Jim called, handing him a respirator. You said you wanted to help. Here's your chance. Logan didn't hesitate. He strapped on the gear and fell into step with the team, their movements synchronized by necessity. The mission was simple but dangerous: evacuate a cluster of homes before the fire overtook the area. Inside the first house, the heat was unbearable, and visibility was near zero. Logan moved with precision, scanning rooms and checking for signs of life. His training kicked in as he cleared debris and guided a disoriented resident out to safety. Over here, he called, spotting a young boy cowering under a table. Ethan hesitated for a moment, watching Logan's calm efficiency. I've got him, Logan said firmly, crouching to reassure the child before leading him outside. When they regrouped, Ethan gave a grudging nod. Not bad, he muttered. Don't sound so surprised, Logan replied with a faint smirk. The team moved on, clearing house after house. By the end of the mission, even the skeptical firefighters had to admit Logan wasn't just a civilian in over his head, he was an asset. As the fire's edge pulled back slightly, Logan and Jim took the opportunity to survey the area for clues. Logan knelt beside a patch of scorched earth, running his fingers over the charred ground. Look at this, he said, pointing to a sharp line where the fire had abruptly changed direction. That's not wind. Someone cut this fire break intentionally, and not the right way. Jim crouched beside him, studying the area. You're right. That's sloppy work. Someone wanted this to burn. Nearby, they found traces of an oily residue, another red flag. Jim leaned closer, frowning. Could be accelerant. We'll need a sample. Do you see this often? Logan asked. Not often, Jim admitted. But I've seen it enough to know when something doesn't sit right. The next morning, Logan and Jim stopped at a small convenience store on the edge of the neighborhood. The air inside was heavy with the smell of burned wood. And the shopkeeper, a wiry man named Luis, looked weary but alert. Crazy times, Louise said, nodding toward the window, where the distant smoke was still visible. Have you noticed anything unusual? Jim asked. People. Vehicles that don't belong around here? Louise hesitated, then nodded. There was a truck. Old. Beat up. It was parked out back for hours before the fire started. Didn't see who was driving, but it looked out of place. Logan and Jim exchanged a glance. Thanks, Logan said, handing Louise his number. If you see it again, call me. Later, they visited Mrs. Thompson, a longtime resident known for her sharp memory and no-nonsense demeanor. Her home had narrowly escaped the flames, thanks in part to the efforts of the firefighters. Mrs. Thompson, Jim began. We're trying to piece together what happened. Do you remember anything unusual before the fire started? The elderly woman folded her hands in her lap, her brow furrowing in thought. You know, this isn't the first time we've had trouble like this, she said. Back in the 90s, there were a string of fires. Turned out some developers were behind them, trying to clear land for new projects. That's helpful, Logan said. Do you think something like that could be happening now? Mrs. Thompson shrugged. Wouldn't surprise me. People don't change. They just get sneakier. As they walked back to the truck, Logan's expression was tight, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Jim noticed and broke the silence. Something on your mind? Logan hesitated, then exhaled. I lost my wife and daughter in the first wave of this fire. I wasn't there. I was out of town for work. And by the time I got back, he trailed off, his voice thick with regret. Jim stopped walking, turning to face him. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. Logan nodded, his gaze distant. I can't change what happened. But if someone did this, if this wasn't just nature, I need to make sure they don't get away with it. Jim placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll figure it out. You're not in this alone. For the first time in days, Logan felt a flicker of something other than grief, determination. That night, as the team prepared for another shift, Logan stood with Jim, going over their findings. The clues were starting to add up, but the picture wasn't complete. We need more, Logan said. We'll get it, Jim replied. And when we do, whoever did this won't stand a chance. Logan nodded, his resolve hardening. The fire wasn't just a force of destruction, it was a message. And he was determined to uncover who sent it. As the flames continued to burn, so did his drive to uncover the truth. No matter how deep into the ashes he had to go. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, it means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The morning light struggled to pierce the smoky haze as Logan and Jim stood outside the fire station, reviewing their findings from the previous day. Logan's jaw was tight, and his hands were restless, turning the charred piece of debris they had collected over and over. This isn't enough, Logan said finally, breaking the silence. Jim nodded, his expression thoughtful. I know. But it's a start. We need to take this to the right people, law enforcement. Maybe even federal investigators. They can connect the dots. Logan frowned. And what if they don't? We've seen how slow the system can be. If we wait, whoever's doing this might cover their tracks or start another fire. Jim sighed. You're not wrong. But this isn't just about us. We're firefighters. Logan, our first job is saving lives and stopping the fire. We can't lose focus. Logan leaned against the wall, his frustration evident. And how many lives are at risk because of this arsonist? We're not just fighting the fire, they're fueling it. Inside the station, tension was mounting. The team had split into two camps, those who believed Logan's theory and those who thought his suspicions were a distraction from their real work. "We're firefighters, not detectives," Ethan said, his voice raised. "Chasing shadows isn't going to stop the flames." "Maybe not," Jim countered. "But ignoring the signs won't help either. If this fire's intentional, it's our duty to bring that to light." The captain entered the room, his expression stern. "Enough. We've got more fires breaking out, and every hand is needed on deck. Until I say otherwise, this investigation stays secondary to the job at hand. Understood?" There was a murmur of reluctant agreement, but Logan's gaze remained fixed on the map spread out on the table, where burn zones and suspected ignition points had been marked. Later that day, Logan and Jim were assigned to inspect an area where the fire had abruptly intensified. The site was remote, nestled in a canyon where containment efforts had faltered. "This is where it started," Jim said, gesturing to a scorched hillside. Logan knelt by a patch of blackened earth, studying the pattern of the burn. "It's too clean," he muttered. "Natural fires spread unevenly. But this, it's precise. Like it was planned." Jim crouched beside him, nodding in agreement. "You see that line? It's almost like they poured something here." As they worked, a faint hissing sound caught Logan's attention. He froze, scanning the area. "Get down," he shouted, pulling Jim behind a large rock just as the ground erupted in flames. The sudden flare-up was intense, the heat driving them back as they shielded their faces. Hidden accelerants had ignited, creating a firestorm that spread faster than either of them had anticipated. Over the radio, Logan called for backup, his voice calm despite the chaos. "This is Reed. We've got a flare-up at the ignition site. Requesting immediate assistance." Jim took charge of directing the incoming crew while Logan scouted a safe route out of the canyon. Despite the danger, their coordination was seamless, a testament to their growing trust. When the rest of the team arrived, the fire had begun to spread toward a cluster of nearby homes. The captain's voice crackled over the radio, directing containment efforts. "What the hell happened down there?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide as he helped Jim and Logan back to safety. "Accelerants," Logan said grimly. "Someone wanted this to burn." The realization sent a ripple through the team. Even Ethan, who had been the most vocal skeptic, couldn't hide his unease. Back at the station, the mood was somber. The flare-up had driven home the danger not just of the fire but of the hands behind it. "We can't keep ignoring this," Logan said, his voice steady but insistent. "Whoever's doing this isn't just starting fires, they're putting every one of us at risk." The captain sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. "You've made your point, Reed. But if we're going to escalate this, we need more than suspicions. We need proof." Jim spoke up. "Logan's right. That flare-up wasn't an accident, and we can't afford to wait for another one. Let's coordinate with law enforcement and see if they can send someone to help." The captain nodded reluctantly. "Fine. I'll make the call. But until then, we focus on the fires. Got it?" That evening, as the team debriefed, Logan found himself sitting outside, staring at the horizon where the flames still burned. Jim joined him, handing over a cup of coffee. "You did good out there," he said. "Didn't feel like it," Logan replied. Jim chuckled. "Welcome to firefighting. You save what you can, and you keep going. That's all anyone can do." Logan nodded, the weight of the day settling over him. "This isn't just a job for me," he admitted quietly. I have to find whoever's behind this, for my family." Jim's expression softened. "And we will. But we can't do it alone. Trust the process. And trust the people around you." For the first time, Logan allowed himself to believe that might be possible. Together, they would face the flames, uncover the truth, and protect what remained. The fire was far from over, but the fight had only just begun. The midday sun struggled to pierce the smoke-filled sky as Logan and Jim navigated a fire-scorched trail deep within the canyon. Their boots crunched over brittle, blackened soil, and the acrid scent of burned vegetation clung to the air. Logan scanned the terrain with practiced focus, his sharp eyes searching for anything that seemed out of place. "You think this is where they said it?" Jim asked, his voice low. "Fits the pattern," Logan replied, kneeling to inspect a patch of charred ground. "If I were planning this, I'd use an isolated spot like this as a base. Less chance of being spotted." They pressed on until they reached a small clearing nestled against the canyon wall. Something caught Logan's eye, a faint glint of metal in the ash. He moved closer, brushing debris aside to reveal a rusted canister. Nearby, a partially melted tarp and charred fragments of paper hinted at hasty efforts to conceal evidence. "This isn't random," Logan said, holding up the canister. "This is accelerant. And look at this." Jim joined him, crouching beside a scorched piece of plywood with faded markings. The edges of what appeared to be a map were still visible beneath the soot. "It's a staging area," Jim muttered, the realization sinking in. "They prepped everything here before lighting it up." Logan nodded, his jaw tightening. They didn't just want a fire, they wanted chaos. Back at the station, the team gathered around a table where the remnants from the canyon clearing had been laid out. Maps, canisters, and tools formed a grim puzzle, one that Logan and Jim were determined to solve. "We need eyes in the sky," Logan said, glancing at Ethan, who had been experimenting with the station's drone. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I've got some footage from earlier runs. Let me check the logs." As the team waited, tension filled the room. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, but it also underscored the dangerous game they were playing. Ethan returned, his laptop in hand. "Here," he said, pulling up a video. The drone footage showed a bird's-eye view of the burn zones. And as Ethan overlaid a grid, a pattern began to emerge. "These aren't random ignition points," Ethan explained. "They align perfectly with the wind patterns for maximum spread. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Logan's face darkened. This wasn't just arson. It was calculated destruction. Their next move was clear: secure more evidence before the arsonist could cover their tracks. Logan and Jim returned to the canyon with Ethan, who piloted the drone to scout the surrounding area. As they approached the clearing, Logan's instincts prickled. Something felt off, too quiet, too still. "Stay sharp," he warned, scanning the perimeter. They reached the staging area to find it largely undisturbed. Logan began photographing the evidence while Jim collected samples. Ethan monitored the drone, keeping an eye on their surroundings. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the canyon, followed by the unmistakable roar of flames. "Someone's here," Ethan said, his voice tense. Logan turned to see a figure silhouetted against the flames, carrying what looked like a torch. The arsonist was trying to destroy the site. "Get out of here," Logan shouted to Ethan and Jim. "I'll hold them off." Jim hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful." He grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him toward the truck. "Evidence in tow." Logan moved swiftly, his years of training guiding his every step. The flames spread rapidly. Fueled by accelerants the arsonist had strategically placed. Logan circled wide, cutting off the figure's escape route. "Stop," he commanded, his voice cutting through the roar of the fire. The arsonist hesitated, then bolted toward the canyon wall. Logan pursued, dodging embers and debris as the fire closed in around them. Reaching the edge of the clearing, Logan tackled the arsonist, pinning them to the ground. Their face was covered by a bandana, but their panicked eyes betrayed their fear. "Who are you working for?" Logan demanded. But before he could get an answer, a nearby canister exploded, sending both men scrambling for cover. The arsonist took advantage of the chaos, slipping into the smoke. Logan cursed under his breath but knew he couldn't risk pursuing them further. By the time Logan made it back to the truck, Jim and Ethan had contained the fire enough to prevent it from spreading further. "You okay?" Jim asked, his eyes scanning Logan for injuries. "I'm fine," Logan replied, catching his breath. "But they got away." Ethan held up a bag containing the salvaged evidence. "But we've got this. And it's enough to make a case." Later that night, the team reconvened at the station. The evidence was handed over to law enforcement, who confirmed it would launch a full-scale investigation. "This is big," the captain admitted. "Bigger than any of us. But you all did good out there." Logan stood off to the side, his gaze distant. Jim approached, clapping him on the shoulder. "You did the right thing," Jim said. "It's not over yet," Logan replied. "But it's a start." Jim nodded. "That's all we can do, one step at a time." As the station quieted for the night, Logan sat alone, replaying the events in his mind. The arsonist was still out there. But for the first time, Logan felt like they were close to uncovering the truth. The fire had taken so much, but it had also ignited something within him, a determination to protect, to fight, and to see justice done, no matter the cost. The smoke had cleared, but the scars of the fire remained etched across the landscape. Charred trees stood like skeletons against the horizon, and the smell of ash lingered in the air. The firefighting was over. But for the people of Palisades, the real work had just begun. The evidence Logan, Jim, and the team had salvaged was now in the hands of law enforcement. Investigators confirmed what Logan had suspected all along: the fire wasn't an accident. A group of developers, desperate to clear land quickly and cheaply, had orchestrated the blazes, using accelerants and exploiting wind conditions to ensure maximum destruction. Their goal was to claim insurance money and acquire cheap land for high-profit developments. When the news broke, the community was stunned. For many, the betrayal cut as deeply as the fire itself. Palisades wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a place filled with memories, histories, and generations of families. To know that human greed had fueled such devastation was almost too much to bear. At the local community center, residents gathered to discuss the next steps. Mrs. Thompson, ever the pillar of wisdom and resilience, stood at the front of the room. "We've lost a lot," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "Homes, businesses, people we loved. But what we haven't lost is each other. This fire may have burned our buildings, but it didn't destroy our spirit." The room buzzed with quiet agreement. Plans were set in motion for rebuilding, with volunteers stepping up to help clear debris, coordinate donations, and support those who had lost everything. Logan stood near the back, observing the determination on every face. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. The next day, Logan visited a small memorial that had been set up near the edge of the canyon. Photos of loved ones lost in the fire were pinned to a makeshift board, surrounded by flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. He knelt before two photos, his wife and daughter. The sight of their smiling faces against the backdrop of destruction brought a lump to his throat. "I hope I made you proud," he murmured. "I couldn't save you, but I could stop this from happening to someone else." A familiar voice broke his thoughts. "You did more than that." Logan turned to see Jim standing a few feet away, holding a bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked from a nearby hillside. "You gave this community a fighting chance," Jim said, placing the flowers near the memorial. "And you gave us a reason to believe we can protect what matters." Logan nodded, his voice thick. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without the team." Jim smiled. "That's the thing about firefighting, it's never just one person. It's a team effort. Always." As the days turned into weeks, the community began to heal. Homes were rebuilt, businesses reopened, and neighbors leaned on each other in ways they never had before. Logan found himself drawn into the recovery efforts. He joined a group of volunteers clearing debris and helping elderly residents salvage what remained of their belongings. His military training, once used for missions overseas, was now focused on rebuilding a neighborhood he'd grown to love. One afternoon, as he repaired a fence for a neighbor, Ethan approached, holding a toolbox. "Need a hand?" Ethan asked, his tone lighter than Logan was used to. "Always," Logan replied with a small smile. The two worked in companionable silence for a while before Ethan spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about serving even when it's hard." Logan paused, looking at him. "Yeah?" Ethan nodded. "I used to think firefighting was just about putting out flames. But this whole thing, it's shown me it's about more than that. It's about protecting people, even when the fight isn't obvious." Logan's smile widened. "You're starting to sound like Jim." Ethan laughed, the sound carrying over the quiet hum of rebuilding activity. That evening, the firefighters gathered at the station, sharing stories and reflecting on the events that had changed their lives forever. The captain raised a glass, his expression solemn yet proud. "To the ones we lost," he said, his voice steady. "And to the ones who stayed to fight." As the team clinked their glasses, Logan felt a deep sense of belonging, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Jim leaned over, nudging him lightly. "You sticking around?" Logan nodded. "Yeah. There's still work to do." The fire had tested every part of Logan, his strength, his resilience, and his capacity for hope. But through the ashes, he'd found something worth fighting for, a community that refused to give up. No matter the odds. Fires could destroy homes, but they couldn't extinguish the bonds between people. And for Logan, the true battle wasn't just against the flames, but against the forces that threatened to tear communities apart. Sometimes, fighting the fire meant confronting the greed, neglect, and indifference that allowed it to spread. And sometimes, it meant standing side by side with neighbors, ready to rebuild from the ashes. As Logan looked out over the recovering neighborhood, he felt a quiet resolve. He couldn't change the past, but he could help shape the future. And that, he realized, was its own kind of justice. The fight wasn't over, but he was ready for whatever came next.
From the fire, the community learned that true strength lies in unity. What does courage look like to you, and how would you fight for your community? Share your thoughts and this story with others. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.